Kenya's educational system has undergone major transformation since 1965 when the government formed the Ominde Commission. The commission recommended a raft of changes in a bid to transform the Kenyan education system and make it more inclusive to Africans. Well, almost 70 years down the line, various changes have been effected in a bid to make the education system in Kenya more responsive to modern-day needs. Currently, Kenya is in the process of implementing a new funding model. Tonight on The Scorecard, we look at the pros and cons of this system. We are joined by a team of experts. I'll be unveiling this team shortly, but not before we go through the numbers by Marie Yambo. Marie Yambo, what are the numbers saying?
Thank you so much, O'Brien, and thank you back at home for taking the time to be with us on this scorecard tonight. And just as O'Brien has already alluded to, we are talking about the new funding model for higher education in the country. Currently, as we know it, it's called HELB, but we'll be getting to understand more about the new model. So just to take us to the basics, O'Brien, is we just want to find out when was it established? And as you can see on the screen already, 1995 is when the Higher Education Loans Board was established, that is HELB, through an act of parliament. And the idea here was that the funding will be based on the differentiated unit cost. That means that the government is to pay, or is paying currently, 80% of the cost of a unit, where 20% is borne by the student, or for those who are not able to through HELB, or definitely through the parents. So far, 1.23 million students have benefited from the HELB, in the past 27 years, and 130 billion shillings is what has been disbursed so far. Now, let's get to what is going to be our basis of discussion tonight, and that is the new higher education financing model. And what we've seen already in the media is that it is based on the needs of the students. And that is to mean that they have been categorized in either vulnerable, extremely needy, or less needy. We'll be getting to understand what that all means. But from what you're seeing on your screen right now is that for those who are vulnerable and those who are extremely vulnerable, they will be funded at 100% by the government, while those who are less needy and needy will be funded at 93%. Brian, I don't know whether you can be able to see this, but if you look at the loans for the vulnerable and the extremely needy, at 18% and at 30%. If you compare that to the needy and the less needy, you can see that the ones who are needy and the less needy are at 40% and at 55%, which means the less you need of the government supports, the more you pay for the loans, and there's a reason for that. So our guest tonight will be able to explain that to us. And it's not only the universities who will be getting this funding, the TVET institutions will also be getting this funding. Definitely the model is still the same for vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, and those who are needy and less needy at 100% for the vulnerable and the extremely vulnerable, while it's at 80% for those who are needy and less needy. Now, let's take, for example, a course in medicine. I'm going to understand this is one of the most expensive fees that you can pay in our public universities currently at 720,000 shillings. That is for a course to do medicine at the Kenyatta University. So if you look at it, how it has been broken down is at a 15% discount. This is, negotiated by the government. So for a student who's going to pursue medicine at the university or Kenyatta University, you'll now be paying 612,000 shillings at 15% discount. Now, the scholarship is at 82%, if you remember the model I've shared with you earlier, and that will cost the government 501,840 annually to pay for the student. The loan is at 18%. That is going to be at 110,160 shillings. Now, for a student who is less needy, it is discounted still at 15%, that is 612,000 shillings annually. So that means that at 38%, the government will be paying 232,580 annually for a less needy student. And then at the same time, there's a loan at 55%, which comes to 336,600. But there is a 7% from the household, which will be paid by the parents, which will be at 42,840. If this is broken down to 2 semesters, it's come to about 21,000 and something over there. So you can do your math. So O'Brien, again, I do not want to speak for our guest, but he'll be able to tell us whether this is going to be more expensive or less expensive for the parents, because there's been hue and cry as to why the government has decided to change the model, and maybe it could actually become too expensive for the parents to afford. So just to bring you up to speed with some of the problems that our universities are facing, and that is they have a debt currently of 61 billion shillings. This is as at June 2022, that is the financial year. And for this financial year, 2023-2024, the National Treasury has increased the disbursement for higher education from 17 billion shillings to 40.3 billion shillings. So we'll want to know whether this new model is going to actually help our universities also cater for other problems and financial problems that they have. And O'Brien, I'd like to hand it over to you to introduce our guests for tonight.
Well, very good indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Marie Yambo, for taking us through the numbers, statistics, as well as facts as the year. Well, that is going to form our conversation this evening. And of course, you have heard a lot about this new funding model adopted by the government as starting from this semester. Well, and this was as a result of the Professor Munavu Commission that came up with these recommendations. The person who is at the helm of implementing and ensuring that this new concept takes off successfully is none other than Dr. Charles Ringera. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Higher Education Loans Board. He's joining us tonight so that he can help us understand more about this new concept. Thank you very much, Dr. for your time.
Thank you, O'Brien, for inviting us here just to highlight some of the key changes that have happened with the new funding model. This new, actually it is new higher education funding model. We've been arguing ourselves within the organization on when new might end. But because now they will have to coexist together between the second years, third years, and fourth years, who will be on the old funding model. So this one will continue being called new until the other group leaves school, and these other guys, then maybe at fourth year.
Very good. Before you proceed, allow us to of course introduce Professor Fred Ogola. He's been here. He's been with us, helping us. He's a legend on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Prof.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing my brother, my friend, my colleague, also a mentor. You can call it anything. There's a lot to share.
Very good indeed. So let's now get these off the chest, and I want to find out from you. Explain to us, why did we feel there was a need to bring on board a new funding model? And I'm taking a cue from the American saying that if it ain't broken, don't even try to fix it.
Yeah, and I will start by saying it was broken.
It was broken.
Professor Gola will tell you that when he was a faculty member of Strathmore, he knows what was happening with the other universities. So, and I think as trying to explain on this DUC model, which was 80 to be paid by government as a scholarship, or now being called a scholarship. Previously it used to be called a grant, and 20% to be paid either by the family or by the parent. The parent or HELB. HELB would come to supplement where the parent is then unable to pay. And the former model used to look at more on equality of the student instead of combining both equality and equity. When you go through the model, you realize that this new model now is combining both equality and equity and put them together so that the short fellows have more financing according to their need. Because, O'Brien, you and I don't take the same lunch. You take according to your need, and your need is different from my need. And that is what the equity that we are trying to bring now under the new funding model. So what happened over history, and the old model, by the way, was implemented in and you didn't mention the commission of the Ominde Commission in 1989. So it has served us for about 32 years or thereabout. And when we then started DUC in 2016, proper DUC, we then seen the cost of the program on average will be about 120,000 or thereabouts. Don't mind whether it was higher than that or it was lower than that. And government said, we will try to, in the 120,000 that we are supposed to give, we will try to pay 80% of that as much as we can. However, in
How was that figure arrived at, 80%?
Because they didn't want to put a burden on the loanee or the family. So the 80% is what government could then afford.
And still at that time, you were still the CEO of HELP.
No.
You are not the CEO of HELP.
Yeah.
But from where you sit, was 80%, an optimum number?
One, whether it was even optimum or not optimum, the cost of the program was miscued. There is no way, if you compare where Professor Gola was before in Strathmore and what is charged in public universities, whereas Strathmore and BCom course will be going for maybe about 360,000 per year. Government in public universities was costing that at about 183,000. So even the costing of the program itself was completely wrong and it was compromised. Now, worse still, government has never been able to meet the 80%. The best they ever did was in 2018-2019 when they paid DUC at 66%.
66%.
Last year,
with a shortfall of about 18%.
Yes, 18%. That was the best year. But then remember, enrollment was also low. And then the budgets were not looking very bad. Then in last year, it went down to 48%. If we had continued with the old model this year, universities would have been receiving 35% of DUC. DUC that we have seen, it is already flawed. When you hear universities like Egerton have been paying salaries at a rate of 57% for the last 3 years, it is because there is no enough money funding students. And then the other confused situation was that these universities will be funded as a block exchequer. The new funding model is now funding the students. Then the student is properly funded through loans and scholarships, and then he goes to pay full school fees. I think you have heard from Yambo trying to tabulate the numbers there of the actual cost of the program, rather than paying this DUC, which we were not even able to pay. So the commitment of this government is that the entire school fees must be paid somehow by somebody, so that universities stop bleeding the way they are currently, cash flow-wise, they are currently bleeding seriously. We have also seen an uptick of, an increase of the amount of money that is going to loan components, because again, the cost of living for our students in the universities. These guys have been struggling even to put a meal on the table for lunch and together for dinner. So,
allow me to ask you these, to interject and find out from you. Suppose the government would have continued to commit and pay the 80% fees, would that have solved the problem that you are facing then?
No, it is still flawed. Because remember, it is priced at 120. DUC, which is priced at 120. 120, Professor Golo will tell you, it cannot be able to teach a university graduate student for 1 year.
What would have been the best number for you?
The best number is now what we have come up with, which is average cost of the program. Actual cost. Cost of the program. So you're finding things like Bachelor of Education now running up to 183,000. You're seeing law going for about 230,000 per year. And remember, each university has got a different costing model. So you will find even what the website has put there for in COOPs, the cost from one university will vary to another university, because they are the ones who know the amount of input they are putting in, so they cost that program appropriately.
Very good. Prof, from what Dr. Ringera is explaining, it means that, and we have had this, from universities, complaining about the high cost of maintaining students, in their universities. Do you think that was good reason enough, to do away with DUC and start a new concept, which kicked off in this semester?
Well, there was a need to do some changes, but not. I wouldn't believe exactly how they did it. There are some things which are really not very clear.
Mm-hmm.
For example, are you funding the students or are you funding their parents? Because here they are trying to say to come out with extremely needy, very needy, not so needy, absolutely needy. You know, coming with those things.
They have three categories, eh?
Yes, they could.
There are four, actually.
Therefore, they could be done in some ways that may not be exactly reflecting people's status.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember when we took this loan when we were in university, you can find from the same family, somebody could get 45. The same family where the parents are father, mother, the same. Somebody gets 37, somebody gets 27. What was the basis of that? Who is more needy than the other? Is it because of your age or something?
Mm-hmm. Were there such cases, Charles?
I would not say there were such cases. Our MTI is purely scientific.
Mm-hmm.
What do I mean? For example, you could actually be, one family could be earning, having an average income of R1 million per month, but then it has 10 children. So we wait and say how much is spent in education against the 10, children.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where you'll find some inconsistencies. Other areas will be things like you say, almost like crime in it. We are under a situation just like I was saying earlier on, where a parent, the firstborn, got money, and the secondborn, when he came to the university, was declined because we assessed the father. The father was a teacher. He was, I think, an high school teacher, headmaster to that level, and was declined. When the father came fuming in our offices, and we interrogated why this one got and why the other one didn't get, one had actually killed the father. So they wouldn't go to the extent. When you bring and then the certificate, what we do? Yes. So the Mzee was actually shocked that this had actually happened. So you will have those inconsistencies. That's why we say our MTI, we think it is at 99.5% accurate. But if you look at the new validators, we have actually put them in place now. What will happen is that we have increased that percentage maybe to 1% in terms of efficacy.
Are you trying to say that it is now foolproof?
We'll go through the process. You tell me whether it is foolproof or not foolproof.
I also have a question, on the means testing instrument. I mean, it is based on 8 variables. One of them being the parent's background, the other being gender. And on the issue of gender, why is gender critical in your MTI?
Gender is critical for purposes of government interventions in some areas. For example, when we wanted more girls enrolled in STEM courses, so every time a girl is enrolled in engineering or medicine, then you see they get 2 points extra. We flip it again. When we want more boys to do nursing, you find the boys there again getting, depending with the program and what is the government national priority programs. Mm-hmm. So that's why the gender discriminant is actually put in place. Mm-hmm. But you say the categories are actually 4. Broadly, there are 4. But then inside them, you will find that is where you're saying there are 8. So one of them we look at is family economic background, which is the poverty probability index, PPI. That is given by KNBS. What KNBS has given us is very valuable information. For example, Kiambu County is counted as an endowed county. But now KNBS goes ahead and says, although this is Kiambu County, Deya is a marginalized county. You know Deya? Down here?
Well,
it's actually a very arid area. Mm-hmm. So it will tell us, if you went to school in Deya, if you come from Deya, you're not being given the same points like the guy who is from Mangu. So the PPI is very good. The other one we look at is affirmative action in terms of PWDs, orphan children or single parented, the marginalized areas, just like I've seen. Again, gender that we have already talked about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering, Mr. Ringara, as you talked about, the increased funding for the students, and I'm wondering, so you've mentioned that also universities have been struggling, in terms of, catering for their administrative and all that. So is it a matter of funding the universities, or is it a matter of, catering for the students? I'm kind of lost there.
So if you look at the old model, it was funding the universities. Mm. The new model is funding the student to go and pay school fees through scholarship and loans and bursaries. So we are more it is a student-centered model rather than the other one, which was university-centered or institution-centered model. Because let me give you a very good example, is the private universities. If you want to go to Strathmore, you don't, and they tell you this is the school fees that you're supposed to pay. They don't tell you this is for painting the building, this is for your lunch, this is for, I don't know, your award, this is for salary increase for this. What happens is that they tell you this is the cost of educating you for the 1 year that you'll be with us, and it has to be paid in the following manner. So the student is the one that comes and pays school fees. So even here, what we are looking at is getting out money to the student to go and pay proper school fees at the institution of learning.
This is where I want to bring Prof. Prof, and I know you have interacted with a number of higher education funding models, not only here in Africa, but in Spain and other jurisdictions. When you look at the model that we have embraced as a country, what do you make of it?
There is some things missing, because I remember that these things of only insisting on need also takes away something called talent. Because when I went to study abroad, we used to get scholarship on talent, how talented you are. Because here it's just about how needy you are rather than how much talented you are. So its disadvantages was the so-called talent from people. I remember when I get the funding for my education from European Central Bank, there used to be a score on, they just look at the grades you get, but also they look at how talented you are in other things. They also try to understand how are you trying to pursue a degree depending on the priority of a country. For example, if the priority of Kenya is medicine, then the people applying for medicine tend to get some advantages in how you get some, for example, funding. So there might be some things that enforce. For example, if President William Ruto wants to create the so-called the ICT corridors and all these innovation, the rest, so students who tend to take innovative courses where the ICT is enhanced may need to get some advantage in funding to enhance, because funding should be an incentive so that you take courses which are of priority. For example, if you go to Israel, for example, in the issue of startups, how startups work, how they talk about the innovation sector, because Israel is seen as the startup for the world, they will be able to give you some incentive there. If you go, for example, in California, the South Coast, they tend to build this Silicon Valley. So if you tend to do courses which are more, let's say Google, all those ones, you'll tend to get more incentive, because Google could be contributing to the funding structure, and therefore they want to bias who goes there. And so I'm trying to say this one is just focusing on how poor you are or how less poor you are, but not focusing on how talented you are, because you might be in a family whereby your parents, you are rich, but your parents don't want you to do some things that could be more interesting for you. I've seen a class whereby parents believe that all their children should be doctors, but somebody believes that artists can actually become some of the most instrumental people. So the child says, me, I want to be an artist, but my parents don't want me to do artist. And you find the university can come with a model whereby those who want to pursue things which are more progressive can get robotics, for example. If you go to some countries like Israel, you go to countries like, for example, Russia, also India, they can actually be able to give you funding depending on your talent, but also interest that you have. But at the same time, they also look at what are the jobs of the future. Because you can be able to give
and then they increase funding yes, based on that.
Yeah, but here is basically how needy you are.
And I think he's raising a very interesting point here, Ringera. Is this something that probably you might need to review? Or is it captured?
For sure, Prof is very right in terms of the working framework. Remember, universities were bleeding. Actually, in another 2-3 years, universities would have, closed, the public universities. So first, this model is to stop the bleeding of universities. Remember, as you saw there, they have 61 billion in pending bills, which have been accumulated over all this time. Those pending bills are KRA, they are SACCOs, they are loans to the banks, and all these, the normal things that, so you have professors today leaving public universities, when they go to check their pension, it has never been remitted. So one of the key things government did was before even you look whether there will be a rescue package or there will be no rescue package of the 61 billion, can we increase cash flow to the universities? Which is the best way to increase cash flows to the universities? It is to make sure that the actual cost of the program is paid from the placement of 2023. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at the overall report, the Presidential Working Party report, it talks about income generation activities for universities, IGRs as they call them. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them are research and consultancy. For example, when we built this expressway, why didn't we maintain the consultancy of designs to University of Nairobi, for example? And out of it, then they could have also benefited from there. So income generating projects are the ones that actually have been proposed as other areas that they can actually come in and see where they can be able to get money for talent, like the way Prof is saying. There are other areas that we are looking at devolved funds, counties and constituencies, because these are their people. They could be interested in, for example, oncologists. Like, for example, you have had the exposure of Kisii region in regard to cancer prevalence. So they could come to Nairobi and say the people who are doing oncology courses, they give sweeteners. Now, what Prof is calling, some deal sweeteners for them to pursue that talent that is going to help that county.
Very good. Yeah. Well, you're watching the Scorecard live from Broadcasting House. Our conversation tonight is on the new university funding model, which has been adopted by the government. It actually has taken effect starting this semester. We're in the company of Dr. Charles Ringera. He's the CEO of Higher Education Loans Board, as well as Professor Fred Ogola, who is a governance expert. We're also in the company of Marie Yambo. And my name is O'Brien Kimani. We are taking a short break, and thereafter we are back with more analysis.
Estaré contigo.
If you see her come back again, you'd better let me know.
Yes, madam.
Or could it be he just wants to keep it all a secret? It's his life, right? Let's drop it.
No quiero enterarme que me hace.
Mimi ni Shamsa, mke wa Zito. Zito aliniambia kuwa hana mke, mimi sitaki kujua.
Kiza jamaa. Shamsa is my wife. Achana naye. Sawa.
Zito kufa kuzikana.
Zuri. Zuri umefanya Zuri.
Live from Broadcasting House, Nairobi, Kenya. This is KBC English Service.
Welcome to B-Time Show, the very best of the 80s and 90s. Me, John Karani, JK.
Timeless music hits across the decades.
This is the place to be after you've had a tough day. Here we celebrate love and life.
Caroline Wangishi, Karo Gatata Mashero.
My name is Geoffrey Mongai B.
News, information and entertainment. KBC English Service, Kenya's official national radio.
I can assure you that we're in the company of good people. Dr. Charles Ringera is the CEO of Higher Education Loans Board, and Dr. Fred Ogola is a governance as well as an economist. They are joining us tonight so that they can help us break down the issue of university funding here in Kenya. Well, Marie Yambo is also with us tonight. She's been taking us through the numbers. She's on the scoreboard now, ready to take us through the comment section. Marie, what are the people saying?
Indeed, just remember our question of the day tonight was what has been your experience accessing help? So we wanted to get your experience, some of your views, and I'll just sample one of you who has already put in a comment. It's Jacob Otenyo. He says he's in a big dilemma and he's waiting to be enlightened more. So I guess he wants to understand more about the new higher education funding model. And so you are actually at the right place. And definitely the CEO here, Mr. Ringera, is actually explaining all that. And so my question to you, Mr. Ringera, we know before we went to the on break, you said that this model of funding is also supposed to help the universities to sustain them, that is. And I'm just wondering, how sustainable is it? Are there other ways that the universities can actually, look at other ways of financing themselves? Because how long will this, go before the universities find themselves again, with the same problems financially?
Thank you, Marie. First of all, let's remember that universities sell a commodity called teaching students. So the student then, they generate their income from students. And so we want to fix that aspect of income generation through tuition fee payment. So to that extent, it's sustainable. In fact, the biggest discussion now should be from a fiscal space perspective of government, how sustainable is it within the MTP4, for example, that is being launched. And what government has done is to socialize this clearly with the economists, both in the Ministry of Education and also in the national planning, so that then we can see how do they become sustainable into the future. But that has not only been left to the government. What universities have been challenged to do is to get a more sustainable way of income generation beyond school fees. For example, we didn't talk about consultancies. Most of the universities also have got cafeterias where these students are. They have the accommodation aspect where these students are actually staying. And a number of them now, through affordable housing, have actually signed with the Ministry of Housing and Public Works in regard to development of affordable housing in terms of hostels, so that they can be able to generate more funding from those hostels, so that we also stop students from walking all over in the slums, so in looking for accommodation, and then they are putting their lives into a risk. And therefore, we are not only closing it only to the student financing, but also looking at broadly to the university, and even seeing what are the successful universities doing. We do know there is an aspect of financial management, for example, in the universities. And that is something that government is completely seized with the matter of governance and financing as one of the things that we need to mount on our university administrators.
And also, just from the statistics that we saw earlier, there is for instance, 720,000 shillings is what will cost, a student at the Kenyatta University, discounted at 15%, that's about 612. But there is also the 60,000 shillings pocket money. Is that part of the scholarship, or that is part of the loan? Because that could actually confuse parents. And also, as you clarify on that, how then cheap is, or how affordable is this model? Because parents have been complaining that the fees have gone up. So maybe you can just break it down for the parents.
Maria, I'll start where you actually indicated that fees have gone up. If anything, fees has actually come down. The school fees of universities were always that 720 you have seen from Kenyatta University for somebody doing medical. What I've quoted KU, because KU is the highest in regard to Faculty of Medicine. It has always been there, but government, because of this DUC model, has never been able to meet the 720, either from the parent and from the government itself, to be able to meet that number. So in this case, what's going to happen is that the full 720 must be charged. The university, government has negotiated a 15% with the university as a discount to the program. If you discount 720 with 15%, it gives you 612,000, the numbers that you actually put there. Assuming a child is vulnerable, after we means test them, the parent actually comes from a humble background. It means, therefore, that 82% of the school fees will be a scholarship. A scholarship is money that government has given, and the money that will not be repaid back even when the student actually completes school. So therefore, 82% of 612,000 gives you a number like 501,840. That is coming in as a scholarship. Then the student is supposed to get 18% in form of a tuition loan. A tuition loan is paid directly to the university and not to the student. 18% of 612,000 is 110,160. If you want 110,160 plus 501,840, you realize we have fully paid the school fees through government intervention of that student to standard medicine at Kenyatta University.
And who is giving the tuition loan of 18%?
The 18% tuition loan, as the name goes, loan, is actually help loan. That's why the letter loan
so
is
this
there.
is from you.
So
and you're giving it at what interest rate?
4%. This is a social fund. It
4%.
has always been 4%. Because it's a social fund, so government does not intend to make money out of this. If anything, actually, we make losses, out of this fund. And the scholarship will be paid by the University Funding Board, because that one is not repaid back. Now, we know that the student requires something to put in the pocket so that they can be able to pay for their accommodation, so that they can be able to feed for themselves during the year. And in this case, because this child is actually vulnerable, we then give him 60,000 in his pocket, and we pay it twice. So that 60,000 goes to stand in for the upkeep that you're actually asking.
And when you say we, you mean you
help.
The help.
Remember, it's a loan. So we are saying the loan, another upkeep loan will be 60,000 for this child. That means this child has actually had a loan for that year of 110,000 plus 60,000, which is 170,000. Let's twist it to a less.
So that is
child.
every year.
Every year. Let's twist it. Remember, average cost, actual cost of the program is annual cost of the program. Let's twist it now and take a child who is less needy, which means the parent is going to pay 7% and government will pay 93% in form of a loan and in form of a scholarship. So again, the discounted school fees is 612,000. This child is supposed to get a scholarship of 38%. 38% of 612,000 is 232,580. Is supposed to get a loan of 55%, which is 336,600. If you add the two numbers, you realize they come to about 379,000 or thereabout. 579 or thereabout. It means, therefore, the parent will pay 7% of the 612,000. 7% of 612,000 is 42,840. That will come from the parent. Now, there are 2 semesters in a year, so you divide by 2, so you get 21,420 per semester. This child is from an extra county school, for example, or an alliance school. In alliance, they were paying 52,000 per term. Now they are being told to go to the university. They pay 21,420 per term, and for the annual, they will pay 42,840. On top of that, we will give this child a loan of upkeep amounting to 45,000. So actually, this child can actually take the 45,000 and pay the 7% the parent was supposed to be paying. Remember, this child who is less needy, these are the children who Professor Ogola will tell you they drive to school. So in fact, you're even giving them 45,000 to fuel their cars to be able to come.
And let me also capture this. I mean, when you talk about 170,000 shillings given to student as a loan by HELB, and if you multiply that by let's take 4 years, so you're talking about 680,000 shillings, without the interest, right? What grace period do you give somebody, or are you planning to give somebody before now you can start charging me? Because let's appreciate the fact that getting employment these days, of course, can be hectic.
If you closely look at the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, one of the key things they are looking at is exporting our labor, so that this youth bulge that we are actually experiencing, we can be able to take it out there so that the diaspora transfers can actually increase from the current 500 billion to about 1 trillion. That's the focus of this government. But then, are they ready to work outside the country? We realize the problem could be the training that we are giving. We are not giving top-notch training to these students. Why aren't we giving top-notch training? Because we are underfunding universities. If you give universities 50% of what they are supposed to get, like we have been giving in the previous years, then lecturers and faculty is going to cut shortcuts so that you are funding them at they will produce for you half big graduates because you have given them half the money they are supposed to get. So we are now saying fund it properly, so that they get top-notch education, they become globally competitive, and they can be able to work outside there. We ease out this pressure of getting a job. But there's something else you do. Currently, when you graduate, we give you 1 year to settle in life, not to look for a job, to settle in life. And that is why we went to TVET, to enhance skills development, because skills then people can even employ their own peers within those, TVET, when they graduate out of TVET. But then we give you...
So there is a grace period of about 12 months.
We give you a grace period of 12 months to settle in life. Thereafter, we give you 10 years to repay the loan. Now you have brought a good issue, a very good discussion point, which you're asking, is 10 years. If I take a whole loan of 1 million shillings, can I be able to repay in 10 years? And this problem is actually in France, and it is currently in UK. They're experiencing the same problem. Now, what we have done is...
And also in Algeria, actually.
Algeria, they have even gone to the streets because they feel the pressure and they are not able to get into these jobs. So what we are doing as a board, we have commissioned a study, a scientist is doing the financial modeling to say how long should they pay. For example, in UK, because students in UK graduate with a loan burden of £10,000 on their hand, if you're, for example, doing medicine.
£10,000?
Yes. But then...
That's about 1.5 million Kenya shillings.
No, it actually comes to about 20 million Kenya shillings.
You're talking about 10
pounds?
10,000 pounds.
10,000 pounds. That's what they are graduating with, quite some hefty amount of money. But they are given 30 years to repay the loan. So those are some of the numbers we are looking at and say which is the best period for these guys who are going under the new financing model to be able to repay their loans. Remember, because of our huge balance sheet, which is now almost over 120 billion, we are saying even if the fiscal space does not allow, it is possible for us to go to the capital market and be able to raise fundings through things like Endu bonds, for example. We had a long chat with Professor Ogola when we are developing our current strategic plan on what other external resources we can be able to raise. And I do remember, Professor Ogola, if you remember, one of the key things we were discussing is, what are you doing with this huge balance sheet that you're having? What are you doing with the corporates in town there? What are you doing with the devolved funds? And that is exactly the journey we are working through to see.
And so the beauty of it is that you appreciate there is a challenge here, and you have embarked on a process of addressing that challenge. I want to bring Prof on board here. I mean, when you look at university funding and then you compare these against our GDP, you're looking at about 1.45 percentage of our annual GDP. Is this enough? Bearing in mind that the best global practices, you're talking about 3%.
No, because you see, if you look at the most developed economies, they have invested more money on education because there's a correlation. In fact, even Nelson Mandela said that education is the biggest equalizer. In fact, that's the very important contention I have with the current funding model, because we say that if you apply a blanket incentive to people who have materially different context, then there's no justice. Because no one will share the same thing. So as far as I'm concerned, the government is supposed to increase the funding to ensure there's a percentage. Actually, even the Abuja Declaration talks about the one on health. There's a declaration that talks about any country not going below 2.5%. Ours is a little bit too low. But also, O'Brien, in spite of the fact that I respect my senior here, what I like about you, I like how you appreciate numbers and you can bring them very easily. But then I want to challenge also that let us not look at the input, let us look at the output. According to me, and I'm sure fair to you, my brother, being senior, so I'll be a little bit very modest here, nevertheless candid, that This model will be evaluated fairly, senior, after, because we shall see what is the secondary school university transition after this model. Because we should not be saying how much money we are putting, we should be saying how does it incentivize people to take university education. So if you see the transition going down, we shall tell you we are sorry because it's not happening. Like I saw the one which took place in the one in Japan, by the way, where they give incentive for people, but they are realizing that that incentive does not actually add up to people actually behaving the way they want. For example, they said, they wanted Japan, Korea want people to have more children. So they say, if you have children, we shall pay you for it. And people don't want to have the children, yet they'll be paid for it. Then we discover that the issue is not about money. The issue is they are finding time is more important than money. That having children takes too much time from you that even if someone is paying, you don't want it. So is this model incentivizing universities and students to take more courses and to advance education? And then the other thing I would say that I'm sure, Senior, I'm happy you remember, this conversation is as old as 2017, the conversation is talking about now, we had. But for me, the best model for funding universities endowment fund. And I would say that Harvard University has $53 billion endowment fund, which makes Harvard the richest university in the world. I'm sure that maybe this journey you can start encouraging them in the private university, for example. But also, if you talk about the issue of universities having what is called some other sources of income, how can they have sources of income and build endowment fund to remove this pressure you are having on your balance sheet? Because I'm sure this is why the university was being funded like 0.5%. Because you remember that in Harvard, you can be poor and you can study.
Let's hear me respond to those three questions.
Yes. So I know that you may not believe it, but private universities which are very good, for example, like Strathmore, tend to be skewed to the ones who have money. In Harvard, it is about your talent. Your talent speaks more than how much you can afford it.
Very good.
And that's what we are looking forward to. I don't know what, Senior, you think about that.
Yeah, I think there, if you look at the reform report, the Professor Munabi report, it has all those components of even endowment funds. And one of the key things we have challenged, particularly the big seven, as they are called, the big seven universities, is you have a big alumnus group. What is this alumnus, trying to do for you in terms of building a sustainable, endowment fund? As you are, University of Nairobi, they have already started that journey. I don't know, I don't have the numbers in terms of where they are. Maybe one of these days you need to ask them. But these are clear interventions that we are looking at in terms of whether the universities can actually be able to build endowment funds that are large enough to be able to supplement what government is actually giving them. Because we have seen the demand for education will continue growing. This year, some 1 million KCSE students will be sitting for KCSE. Last year, some 867 sat for KCSE. So we are seeing that growth, growing over time. And Kenyans, because as per Article 43F of the Constitution, education, shelter, food, all these things are supposed to be provided by the state. So if population is increasing, the state may not be able eventually to afford this. So universities must come up with other financing models, and that is why they are being encouraged now to go to the other sectors. There is a point you have mentioned, which is very critical. And if you look at MTP4 now, which is being launched now, government is not only looking at how much money have I put in healthcare, how much money have I put in health, how much money have I put in education. They are now looking at, because what are the outcomes? And that is changing the conversation in the planning department of the ministries on looking more at outcomes, which is exactly what you're talking about. Some of these things will change, but they might change a little bit slower because also the way we are wired and also the way as a country, it's like an elephant trying to turn. It takes time to be able to make a full turn. And the universities being public universities, we don't expect them to turn as quickly as the way the private universities will be able to turn around.
And also, Obra, there's something very interesting is that maybe, Senior, because of your presence here, we take advantage. When can we be sure that a child born in any part of Kenya will know that if I have, my parents will take care of it. If I don't have, I will still get my education. Can we say we are there, or how or when do you think we can ever be there?
From basic education, I can say I think we are there. From what President Kibaki started to what the former administration has done and what this administration is doing, putting more money in education. For basic education, I think we are there. The problem was this animal of higher education. And I think this model is part and parcel of providing a sustainable solution of giving every child. Remember, when the president was actually launching this model, he said, leaving no child behind. Will it achieve in this year? Maybe not. But I'm certain in another 2-3 years, I think we should be able to be there. This model...
It is a journey, that's what you're saying.
It is a journey. And before we signed off this model, by the way, we presented 54 simulations to His Excellency the President and asking every commandee why this one and not the other one. Until on the 54th one, he says, you have now arrived to the number that I was looking for. And that is how we went to the lounge.
Very good. Yes, Marie.
Yes, so there are questions from our viewers. I think it would be unfair for us to close before we could ask Mr. Ringera to respond to them. And Hayes Ken on Facebook is asking, how can I add some information about my parents after submitting the application? I'm really stuck. So that is one of the questions, Mr. Ringera, probably you could actually respond to that. The other one is Kigotho Karuku is how much is help giving students for upkeep? Then again, this depends on, the categories, what category you fall into. The other question is from Terus, who says, my question is, do students going for diploma in primary education, especially teachers training college? I think he's asking if they can also be funded, something of that sort. What is the difference between HELP, which is I think the higher education fund, and HELP? More or less the same thing, but yeah, different funding models. So even as you answer to this, Mr. Ringera, issue of defaulters has been a very, it's a pertinent issue within, your organization or, your sector. How then are you planning to deal with this? Because fine, you're saying now it's going to be affordable, but there's still some loans. And how has this, the defaulter issue affected the, funding as far as, giving loans to students?
And even before you respond to that, there is also a question here on Twitter from somebody called Claude Omwami, and he's asking, are you also relooking at an issue of extending the application deadline, because I was locked out by the national blackout?
That looks like a joke, but anyway. But also, Senior, could you also look at the question as to people who cheat parents? Because I've been cheated by people I pay school fees for. Like my niece or nephew is in high school, in campus. I'm giving them full money, yet actually they are accessing help for upkeep, but they're not telling me.
Very well. Respond to that before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Let me start with the quick one. The easy ones. Like, for example, www.hef is higher education financing.co.ke. HELB is higher education financing. Universities Fund is higher education financing. TVET Fund is higher education financing. So we have collapsed all that. If you look at the Kenya Kwanza Education Charter Manifesto, number 14 says, I will amalgamate University Fund, HELB, and the TVET Fund bond. So this is what has come. That link now is showing you that the merger process is actually almost, arriving home. And therefore, we have one point of where you look for money in terms of funding. In the admission letter of the student, we have indicated clearly how to apply for those loans. And when you come to that www.hef.co.ke, we even have a training program at the beginning so that we can be able to educate you. There was a question on how can I go back to my application? You log back again to your portal. Remember, when you you create an account in the portal, it remains there. So if there are some documents you have not been able to upload, what you do, just get into the portal again, log into the portal again, and go to the area that you are actually not completed. The system is able to allow you. But in case you have a serious challenge, please drop us an email on contactcenter@help.co.ke. we shouldn't be able to sort you out. Please always remember to put your ID number as a reference point. This guy was affected by the national blackout. Why is he complaining? The blackout ended, is it on Saturday? And the applications are still going on up to 7th of September. But then remember what HE is saying, leaving no child behind. Last week when we went to Parliament with my CS, he indicated that they will make sure that all the 265,000 students will have to apply for a scholarship or a loan before we say we are now done. But by 7, we should start running the first simulations and see what will happen. Professor Ogola, you're asking about these cheaters. Of course, this is why we are encouraging, let's put all the resources together so that then, even as you find that child who is cheating you, then you must also have visibility. He has been given this amount of scholarship and he has been given this amount of help. In fact, if you look at the model in Strathmore, even the people who live on scholarship for Diageo, for example, they are first of all told you must apply for help first before the scholarship then comes into place. Finally, for defaulters, currently we have about 125,000 defaulters or guys who are running away. We know the circumstances which are there currently, worth about 15 billion shillings. If I ever got that 15 billion shillings this year, by the way, I wouldn't even be going to the government for purposes of being funded. But we have a lot of interventions and a lot of mechanisms of being able to trace these defectors. If we had time, I could have gone through the validators, and what those validators of this MTI is helping us in terms of trying to trace also the defaulters. Because some of them, when they're applying for the loan, the parent who are signing for them, you go to the on defaulters list and you find actually these parents are there. So we are trying to link on what you call community-based.
And how do you deal with that, by the way?
It's one of the processes that you use in terms of recovery. We're linking these defaulters and whether their child is actually trying also to borrow. But we don't deny the child the loan they are supposed to get. But you see, they have been able to volunteer the defaulter to us, and the defaulter now is with us.
So how do you deal with that parent now?
We started negotiating now, engaging with him. You know, it is very painful, O'Brien, when I send you a child to come and look for, to tell you to repay help loan.
Yet I defaulted.
It's a bit embarrassing.
Your child becoming a debt collector.
Correct. It's a bit embarrassing. Yeah.
Very well. Gentlemen.
And I just want to share, my nephew, after I paid for him school fees up to the 3rd year, then one day he puts pressure on my sister. I tell them, but we're going to apply for health fund. Then he told me, actually I called you. He told me, you let him give you ID number. When I asked him for his ID number, he went mute. It's when I discovered that many parents or sponsors are actually being deceived.
Very good. Well, we have to come to the close of this conversation. It has been a very interesting conversation, some sort of enlightenment kind of debate we've been having here, so that we can help people understand these higher education funding model. And of course, we have been in the company of Charles Ringera. He's the CEO of Higher Education Loans Board. Time now for us to do our scorecarding question for the night. We have 2 questions as always. And the first question is, will the new university funding model solve Kenya's higher education funding problems? And I want to start with you, Prof.
In a scale of 1 to 5? I believe 3.5.
3.5?
Yes.
Is your answer yes or no, first of all?
Yes, everything solved to some extent. And as senior here, we are arguing that we know when it will be sustainable. He says we are not yet there. He said this was a stopgap measure to sort out the issue of the pending bills. So the pending bills is still huge. 61 billion shillings, a lot of money. Defaulters are still there. So it will solve it to some extent, but I'm sure there must be more things to be done, and say there are more suggestions coming along the way.
So you're giving it 3.5?
3.5.
In terms of solving funding problems for higher for
because I went through it. Help took me to school, and there's no need of throwing the baby with bathwater.
Very good. Yeah. Charles Ringera, what about you?
Yeah, using the same scale that Prof has used, I would say we've gotten it right. We've gotten it right in terms of funding of the university cash flow bleeding problem that we are currently having. So I'll give it anywhere like 4.8. However,
4.8.
4.8. The true taste of this will be the way we see the behavior of these first class that we have already taken in, and particularly the efficacy of the MTI. And the 9 validators we have put there, we hope you'll be able to get the real true north of each of the students in terms of neediness. As I told you, the scorecard today, MTI is about maybe 99.5% or thereabout. We are aiming for 1% on this, saying the truth in terms of your neediness levels.
Very good. And now the next question is the new university funding model responsive to today's educational needs?
Wow. O'Brien, I'm sure you can predict it's going to be lower than what I gave. I'll give it a 2 because I told you we are looking at what is the Kenyan blueprint in terms of education. Where should we be? At the same time, talent, because I meet people who are hugely talented that if you can just adjust funding to their talent, they can go very far. And also at the same time, we also want the university also to respond by saying, when universities also subsidize the government funding and the rest, so I'm sure that there must be universities sitting back there. I've seen professors who are saying they are professors of strategy and entrepreneurship still begging for salaries. It's such a sad state of affairs. And I'm sure these are some of the things I say, if you did a degree and you're a professor teaching entrepreneurship and strategy, there should be some strategy and entrepreneurship being seen in your life rather than just you trying to preach in a class with a book.
So you're giving it?
2. 2 out of 5.
2 out of 5, eh? Dr. Ari, it's your time now. Is the new university funding model responsive to today's educational needs?
One of the key things I would say is that, remember, as we are financiers of education, we are not in faculty. In terms of responding to today's needs, faculty must think hand. If you look at the report, the Professor Munavu report, it has actually questioned some of those yellow notes professors are still teaching with. Is it still relevant for this, the current economy that we are in? Maybe not. And I think there is a challenge for faculty to start improving what they are teaching. This selection criteria we have had of COOPs, in terms of students choosing where they want to go, we have seen students saying, I cannot do that course in that university. So which means students are now given a chance of saying, I have seen this university is very good in communication. I want to do my degree in communication in this university and not any other university. You tell them this is a private university. He says, I better break a bank, but I go to learn what I want to learn in communication from a specific university. So what will happen in future? I think slowly, the universities that will not actually be keeping up with what the economy requires will actually naturally die themselves because they have no students coming to them.
Very good.
Actually, if I add that, I remember as a professor, they usually say a professor is a seat. A seat means you sit on a chair of money. I have mobilized funding. There's something I'm working on that I can fund people studying under me. But professors here is just by name, but if you look at their income, doesn't really reflect the income of a professor. Thank you.
Very good. My producer is telling me that you didn't give your number. Give your number.
1 to 5.
I mean, how was your rating? To the question: is the new university funding model responsive to today's educational needs?
I think I'll give it a 3, but again, as I said, it shouldn't be able to kind of influence how faculty will start producing graduates that are resonating with the economy.
So you're giving it 3.
If I give you good money, why would you teach me any less?
Very good.
Yes.
Well, Marie, do you have your closing remarks?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ringera, and definitely, Prof, for coming in and, enlightening us on the issue of the new higher education financing model. I'm sure our viewers have also learned a lot. Those who had questions, your questions hopefully were answered. Let's look forward and see whether this is going to work, because all we want is the best for all of us, our sisters, brothers, our children. So, O'Brien.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Well, this is a new concept, and of course, it is a learning curve. I mean, there will be mistakes along the process, but remember, perfection is a question of persistence. So we'll start, there will be challenges, teething problems, but eventually we'll get it right. It's a question of giving ourselves time, and eventually we'll get it right. As we say, Rome was never built in a day. It took years. You have been watching The Scorecard. Our conversation this evening has been on the new Higher Education Funding. If you like it, it's called NHEF. Don't confuse it with NHIF. My name is O'Brien Kimani. We come to the end of this conversation. Remember to stay tuned on Tuesday again, same time right here on KBC Channel 1. Thank you very much for your time. Marie, asante sana. Have yourself a good night.
Usiwe mtazamaji pekee, shiriki kwenye Lucky Game na pia wewe unaweza jishindia kama Sheila.
Nimeshinda.